Imagine this scenario. It's 1932. You're in Warsaw, Poland, in this rather quiet office.
Right.
And inside, something incredible is happening. An intellectual feat that, frankly, the world's best minds thought was impossible. A small team working with, very limited resources. They've just cracked the ultimate code machine. The German Enigma.
The Enigma. Yeah, the machine that Nazi Germany was absolutely convinced was mathematically, fundamentally unbreakable.
It's hard to overstate that confidence they had.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
And this wasn't just, breaking a code. This was huge. An intelligence coup of, staggering proportions.
So this Polish team, they suddenly held the keys to Hitler's military secrets.
Years before the world was even really ready to admit a world war was looming. They had this revolutionary, potentially life-saving intelligence in their hands.
But that's where the story takes this really tragic turn, and that's the core of our deep dive today. It's about the human side, the institutional side.
Exactly. Because when this Polish team, understandably, tried to share this earth-shattering breakthrough...
You'd expect trumpets, right? Collaboration.
You would.
Yeah.
But when they went to the major allies, Britain, France, the reaction wasn't relief or urgency. It was...
skepticism, dismissal.
Skepticism, dismissiveness, yeah, and pretty much outright refusal to believe it was real. They were basically ignored, patted on the head almost.
Until it was very, very nearly too late.
Tragically late. So, look, the mathematics of the code breaking itself is fascinating, incredibly clever, but that's almost just the setup.
Right.
Our mission today, for you listening, is to really dig into why. Why were the people who handed the Allies arguably the most crucial advantage of World War II?
An advantage that shortened the war, saved millions of lives.
Absolutely. Why were they almost completely erased from the story? We're diving into the human stuff. The institutional arrogance, the geopolitical prejudice, the nationalism that just blinded the most powerful nations on Earth.
It sounds like a really potent mix of human failure, just completely overshadowing this incredible intellectual success.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so our sources for this deep dive, they really map out that whole period, don't they? From the breakthrough in 32.
Right through to that frantic last-minute handover in 1939.
And then the kind of historical amnesia that set in afterwards. We really need to understand that moment of rejection. Why would powerful nations facing an obvious threat just reject intelligence that could literally save them? It seems counterintuitive.
It does. And that's the puzzle we need to unpack.
Okay, so before we get to the Polish team and their amazing solution, we need to properly understand the mountain they had to climb, the Enigma machine.
Yeah, you really do. Because if Enigma was a lock, it wasn't just a tricky lock. It was like a lock with more possible combinations than stars in the visible sky. Almost.
It sounds like hyperbole, but it's close, isn't it?
It really is. It was revolutionary for its time. Looks kind of simple on the outside, maybe like a complicated typewriter.
Right.
But inside, it housed this incredibly complex dynamic system for scrambling messages.
And the Germans had been working on this for a while. They didn't just invent it in 32.
Oh, no. They'd spent years through the 1920s and early 30s perfecting it, refining it.
Yeah.
And they had just complete, utter confidence in its security, its infallibility.
So walk us through the basics. What made it so special? It wasn't just substituting letters like older codes.
No, not at all. The core of it was electromechanical. When an operator pressed a key, say T, an electrical current went through the machine.
Okay.
First, it might go through something called a plug board. We'll get back to that. It's important. But then it hit a series of rotating wheels, the rotors.
Rotors, right. These were the key scrambling elements.
Exactly. Usually they'd pick 3 rotors from a box. Maybe they had 5 or more to choose from later on and put them in the machine in a specific order. Each rotor had internal wiring that swapped the letter, like A becomes Q, B becomes Z, whatever.
But the crucial part is that they rotated.
Yes. That's the dynamic part. After you typed one letter, one or more of the rotors would click forward one position. So the internal pathway, the substitution, changed every single time you pressed a key.
Ah, I see. So if I type T again right after the first T, the rotors have moved, and it comes out as a completely different letter this time.
Precisely. T might be X the first time, and K the second time, and P the third. The machine is constantly changing its internal state.
Okay, that alone sounds like it would defeat most traditional code-breaking methods.
It absolutely does. Things like frequency analysis, where you look for common letters like E or T in English, that's useless because the encryption is always changing.
But there was more, wasn't there? The reflector.
Ah, yes, the reflector. The Umkehrwahl in German.
Yeah.
This was maybe the most elegant part of the design. After the electrical signal went through the 3 rotors, scrambling it,
Mm-hmm.
it didn't just go out. It hit this special fixed wheel, the reflector, which had its own unique wiring. And it did something simple but brilliant. It bounced the signal back
Back through the same rotors.
through the same 3 rotors, but in reverse order, scrambling it a second time before the final letter lit up on the lamp board.
Wow. So it's like scrambling the scramble.
Kinda, yeah. Doubles the complexity, effectively. And it also created a neat property. It made the cipher reciprocal. If encrypting T resulted in K, then typing K on a machine with the same settings would always decrypt back to T.
Okay, that makes sense for sending and receiving. But you said it introduced a flaw.
A subtle one, yes. Because of the way the reflector worked, sending the signal back through the same path, it meant a letter could never encrypt to itself. P could never become T. A could never become A.
Interesting. Seems minor, but maybe useful later.
It was useful for the British codebreakers later at Bletchley Park, yeah. But for the Germans, the combination of rotating rotors, the reflector, and one more element, it just cemented their absolute belief. This machine was unbreakable.
Okay, so let's talk about that belief. It wasn't just faith. There was math behind it, right? That huge number we hear about.
Oh, yeah. The number is staggering. And it largely comes from that element I mentioned we get back to, the plug board, the stecker bread.
Right, the plug board. What did that do?
Picture a telephone switchboard on the front of the Enigma machine. It had pairs of sockets, and the operator could connect pairs of letters using cables. A was swapped with P, B with G, and so on, up to 10 pairs typically.
So before the signal even got to the rotors, it might get swapped by the plug board.
Yes, and crucially, after it came back through the rotors and the reflector, it passed through the plug board again on its way to the lamp. So the letter might be swapped, then scrambled by the rotors, reflected, scrambled again by the rotors in reverse, and then potentially swapped again.
Good grief. That sounds incredibly complex.
It added a phenomenal layer of complexity. So think about it in the early 1930s. You've got the choice of which 3 rotors to use, the order to put them in, the starting position for each rotor, the ring settings on the rotors, which affected when they turned over, and the astronomical number of ways you could wire up that plug board.
Okay, so what's the final number? How many possible settings are we talking about?
Well, the specific number varies slightly depending on the exact model and procedures, but the figure that's often cited, and it's in our sources for the military Enigma of that era, is over 150 million.
150 million?
Yeah, 150 with 12 zeros after it. It's a number that's just, it's hard to even conceptualize.
How does that translate into trying to break it?
Well, think about brute force, just trying every single key. Even if you had, say, 10,000 people, really highly trained, and each one could test one setting every single minute.
Working 24/7?
24 hours a day, no breaks. It would still take literally thousands, maybe tens of thousands of years to guarantee you'd find the right setting for just one message.
Okay, that's effectively impossible.
That was the mathematical consensus, not just difficult, but fundamentally impenetrable by any conventional means, especially brute force. It really was seen as a perfect cryptographic fortress.
Which just makes what the Polish team did next seem even more, well, miraculous. An act of sheer intellectual rebellion against mathematical impossibility.
You could absolutely call it that.
So the stage for this rebellion, this impossible feat, was where exactly?
It was Poland's General Staff's Cipher Bureau, the Bureau's Cipher, in Warsaw.
And the team. Not a huge army of cryptographers.
No, remarkably small. The core trio were Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Różycki, and Henryk Zygalski.
And what's really striking, you mentioned earlier, they weren't your typical intelligence types.
Not at all. They weren't military men, not career spies. They were mathematicians. Specifically, they'd been recruited from Poznań University after taking a special course in cryptography. They came at the problem from a completely different angle.
Pure mathematics, abstract algebra, that kind of thing.
Exactly. They were thinking in terms of group theory, permutations, statistical patterns in the abstract mathematical structure, not just looking for linguistic clues or trying to guess bits of the message.
And Rejewski was the key figure initially.
Marian Rejewski was definitely the star, especially in that initial breakthrough phase. And he was incredibly young, only 27 back in 1932.
Wow.
Our sources describe him as having this almost supernatural ability to perceive structure, mathematical patterns, where everyone else just saw random, chaotic noise.
He wasn't trying to guess the message.
No, he was trying to deduce the machine itself. The unchanging internal wiring of the rotors, even though the French intelligence had provided some initial, slightly outdated commercial manuals, the military version was different. He wanted to know how it was built internally.
And he found a way in. Not by breaking the machine's core security, but by exploiting a mistake.
A mistake in how the Germans used the machine. A procedural flaw born out of their supreme confidence, ironically.
Okay, how did the Germans accidentally leave the door unlocked, so to speak?
Well, it was about setting the key for each message. Every day there was a basic daily key, the rotor order, the plugboard settings, etc. But for each individual message, the operator had to choose a unique three-letter starting position for the rotors, let's say RFA.
Okay, unique for each message. Seems secure.
It would have been, except for how they communicated that chosen setting. To make absolutely sure the receiving operator got it right and could set their machine the same way, the sending operator was instructed to encrypt that three-letter key RFA, in our example, twice in a row, using the daily key settings.
Wait, so they'd type RFA, RFA, 6 letters?
Exactly. RFA, RFA. That 6-letter block would be the very start of the encrypted message.
They were trying to add security through repetition, like double-checking.
Precisely. But for a mathematician like Rejewski, that repetition was a massive vulnerability. It was a gift.
How so? What did that repetition reveal?
Let's say the encrypted result of RFA was PQXKJW. Rejewski realized he didn't need to know what RFA was. He just needed to look at the relationships between the encrypted letters. Specifically, the relationship between the first letter P and the fourth, K, the second Q and the fifth, and the third X and the sixth, W.
Because the same original letters, RFA, were typed just 3 steps apart on the rotors.
Exactly. The underlying rotor movement between the first and fourth letters was the same. The movement between the second and fifth was the same, and between the third and sixth. Even though the actual letters changed, the mathematical relationship created by the rotor wiring and movement between those pairs, first and fourth, second and fifth, third and sixth, had a structure.
Okay, this is where it gets really clever. It's not about the letters, it's about the pattern of substitution.
Precisely. He used permutation theory. If you collected enough of these 6-letter indicators from messages sent on the same day, using the same daily key, you could start to see patterns, or cycles.
Well, cycles.
Yeah. For the first and fourth letter relationship, for example, across many messages, maybe A would consistently link to F, F would link to W, and W would link back to A. That's a cycle of length 3, AF, FWA. Another set of letters might form a different cycle.
So he wasn't reading messages, he was mapping the structure of these mathematical relationships.
Exactly. He called these patterns of cycles the characteristics of the daily key. And here's the absolute genius part. Rejewski mathematically proved that these characteristics, the length and number of these cycles, depended only on the rotor settings. Which rotors, their order, and starting positions. They were independent of the plugboard settings.
Wait, he bypassed the plugboard? That was the thing that created the astronomical number of possibilities?
He bypassed it completely for this stage. The plugboard just shuffled which letters were in the cycles, but it didn't change the underlying structure of the cycles, how many cycles there were, and how long each one was.
That's incredible. He found a way to ignore the most complex part of the problem by focusing on this subtle structural pattern caused by the procedural error.
It was an astonishing intellectual leap. By analyzing these cycle structures, the characteristics, he could work backward using permutation group theory. He figured out which daily rotor settings could possibly produce the patterns he was seeing.
And this allowed him to figure out the rotor wiring itself, even though he'd never physically seen a German military Enigma rotor.
Yes, that was the ultimate prize. By knowing the characteristics produced by known daily keys, which the French intelligence service, crucially, supplied some of via a German spy named Hans Thilo Schmidt, and knowing the mathematics, he could deduce the internal wiring of the first 3 military rotors. It's considered one of the greatest feats of cryptanalysis ever.
Just pure deduction. But doing these calculations by hand must have been laborious.
Immensely. So they needed to mechanize it. Rejewski, along with Różycki and Zygalski, developed tools. First was the cyclometer.
Cyclometer.
It was basically an electromechanical device, like 2 Enigmas wired together. It could rapidly generate a catalog of all possible cycle structure characteristics for every single one of the 17,576 possible rotor starting positions.
So they built a library of all the patterns the machine could make.
Exactly. So when they intercepted the day's indicators, they could figure out the cycle structure and then just look it up in their catalog to find the correct rotor setting for the day.
Okay, that speeds things up. But they went further, right? The bomba?
Yes, the bomba cryptologiczna. This was even more ambitious. As the Germans improved procedures slightly, The cyclometer method became harder. The bombe was essentially an attack machine. It consisted of 6 Enigma replicas linked together electrically, designed to churn through the possible rotor settings automatically.
How did it work?
It exploited those characteristics again. You'd feed it the day's characteristics, and the machine would clatter away, testing rotor settings at high speed until it found one that matched the observed pattern, usually stopping when a consistent solution was found. It dramatically reduced the time needed to find the daily key.
So they invented automated code-breaking machines.
They absolutely did. Precursors to what Turing and others would build at Bletchley Park.
Right.
And by December 1932, the Polish team had done it. They hadn't stolen anything physical. They had mathematically reverse-engineered the Enigma, deduced its wiring, built working replicas, and developed mechanized ways to find the keys.
All through the power of mathematics and this clever exploitation of a procedural flaw.
Right, and Poland now had essentially real-time access to a huge volume of secret German military communications. This was months before Hitler even consolidated power in Germany. A truly staggering advantage.
Okay, so Poland has this incredible world-changing secret. They know war is likely coming. The logical next step seems obvious. Share it with potential allies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially France and Britain. Poland was, geographically very vulnerable, stuck between Germany and the Soviet Union. They knew their best hope lay in collective security, a united front.
So they reached out. They must have expected a pretty positive reaction, maybe relief, elation.
They certainly hoped for serious collaboration. They started sharing some intelligence derived from Enigma with the French Deuxième Bureau from quite early on, maybe around 1931 or 32, even before the full breakthrough. The French were helpful, providing those crucial documents via their spy. But getting the British involved and getting either power to truly believe the scale of the breakthrough, that was another story.
So when they fully revealed what they could do, say by 1937, 1938, what was the reaction?
Not, thank God you've saved us. It was more like polite interest, followed by deep skepticism, and ultimately dismissal. That's fascinating, chaps, but we don't really think that's feasible.
Unbelievable. Why? Why reject something so vital? Our sources point to some really deep-seated reasons, right?
Painfully deep-seated. It wasn't just about one country keeping secrets from another. It was more complex, more human in a way.
Okay, let's break those down. Reason number 1 seems to be institutional arrogance. Britain and France had their own big code-breaking operations.
They did. Places like Britain's Government Code and Cipher School, GCNCS, they had invested a lot of time and effort trying to crack Enigma themselves, and they had failed. Their top minds had looked at it and concluded basically that it was mathematically unbreakable or near enough.
So their own failure created a mental block.
It created an intellectual cage, yeah. Their consensus was set. Enigma is impenetrable by calculation. You need spies, stolen code books, that sort of thing. Traditional espionage. When the Poles came along saying, actually, we solved it with abstract algebra and permutation theory,
It didn't fit their model.
it directly contradicted their own established conclusions. It challenged the intellectual authority of their own experts, their own institutions. To accept the Polish claim meant admitting their own top people had been wrong, maybe even incompetent, for years.
And powerful institutions aren't great at admitting they were wrong.
Especially not on something this important. It was almost easier psychologically to assume the Poles must be mistaken or exaggerating, or maybe they'd only broken an older, simpler version. The Polish math itself was complex, using concepts unfamiliar to many traditional cryptanalysts. It was easier to dismiss it as too theoretical, too academic.
Okay, that's institutional pride. What about national pride, particularly the sources mentioned, the British?
Yes, that's the second major factor. There was a definite sense of national superiority, particularly within the British intelligence and military establishment. GCNCS saw itself as the world leader in cryptanalysis, heir to a long tradition going back to World War I.
Like Room 40.
Exactly. The idea that this smaller nation, Poland, seen as, frankly, less developed, less sophisticated in military tech, had achieved this monumental breakthrough that they couldn't. It was deeply galling. It offended their national pride.
They couldn't accept being beaten to the punch on the biggest intelligence challenge of the age.
It seems that way. It required a level of humility that just wasn't there. There was this embedded cultural elitism, a belief that if a problem was truly difficult, the solution must come from Cambridge or Oxford, not from Warsaw.
Which leads straight into the third reason, perhaps the ugliest one, that geopolitical prejudice, the way Western Europe viewed Eastern Europe.
The sources are pretty clear about this, unfortunately. There was a deep-seated condescension. Poland was often seen by leaders in London and Paris not really as an equal partner, but more as a buffer state. Maybe useful, but ultimately peripheral, militarily weaker, and certainly not an intellectual powerhouse on par with the West.
So the idea that the most crucial cryptographic breakthrough could come from Polish mathematicians.
It just didn't compute within their established social and intellectual hierarchy. It defied their worldview. It was easier to dismiss the source than to grapple with the unbelievable truth of the message.
So it wasn't just about not understanding the math. It was about not respecting the mathematicians because of where they came from.
That seems to be a huge part of it. The truth was discounted because the messenger didn't fit their profile of genius. The French were, as I said, a bit more involved and believed more, partly thanks to their spy confirming things, but even they couldn't fully convince the deeply skeptical British establishment.
So Poland was left isolated, holding this revolutionary capability, this key to survival, and the world powers who needed it most refused to believe it was real.
Utterly alone, knowing what was coming, reading the German plans and shouting into a void, it's a really tragic situation.
And while the Allies were, frankly, stuck in their own arrogance, the clock was ticking loudly.
Ferociously. You have the Polish breakthrough fully operational by late 32, early 33. January 33, Hitler takes power in Germany. Then 35, 36, 37. You see Germany openly rearming, marching into the Rhineland. War becomes undeniable.
And Poland, reading the decrypted Enigma messages, they could see this coming clearer than anyone.
They had specifics, troop movements, military planning, diplomatic cables. They were trying to use this intelligence to warn Britain and France to coordinate defense. But nobody was really acting on it because, fundamentally, they didn't fully trust the source or the scale of the intelligence coup.
But there was another clock ticking too, wasn't there? A technical deadline for the Polish methods themselves.
Yes, absolutely critical. The Germans, despite their confidence, weren't stupid. They were constantly looking for ways to improve Enigma's security. And the specific method Rejewski had pioneered, the one based on that double-typed indicator, its days were numbered.
Because the Germans were going to change the procedure.
They were. And they were also going to upgrade the machine itself. This started happening around 1938, particularly with the German Navy, and then the Army followed.
What were the upgrades? How did they impact the Polish method?
Two main things, both devastating for the original Polish approach. First, they introduced more rotors. Instead of just having 3 rotors available to choose from for the 3 slots of the machine, they increased the pool to 5 rotors.
Okay, so choosing 3 from 5 instead of 3 from 3.
Right. That immediately multiplies the number of possible rotor combinations, the initial setup complexity, by a factor of 10. The Polish cyclometer and bombus were designed around the maths of the 3-rotor problem. This complicated things significantly.
They'd need to deduce the wiring of the 2 new rotors as well.
Exactly. A huge new task. But the second change was the real killer blow to Rejewski's original method.
Which was?
They stopped double encrypting the message key, that RFA procedure. Gone. They introduced a new, more complex system where the message key was only sent once.
And Rejewski's entire mathematical breakthrough, the permutation cycles, relied entirely on comparing the first and fourth, second and fifth, third and sixth letters of that repeated key.
Precisely. Without that repetition, the whole method of analyzing cycle structures, the characteristics, became instantly obsolete. It just didn't work anymore. The very foundation of their daily key-finding process was gone.
So by late 1938, early 1939, the Poles knew their incredible advantage, their secret weapon developed over years, was about to become useless.
Completely useless against the upgraded machines and procedures. Their decade of groundbreaking work was about to turn into a historical curiosity, just as the war they'd foreseen was about to erupt. The window was slamming shut, fast.
That must have created a sense of absolute desperation in Warsaw.
You can only imagine. They had maybe months, perhaps only weeks, before their intelligence wellspring dried up completely, so they made a final dramatic decision. A gamble to try and save Europe, and certainly to try and save Poland.
They would approach Britain and France again.
Yes. But this time, they wouldn't just offer hints or decrypted summaries. They decided they had to give them everything, the whole shop.
Everything, meaning the mathematical methods.
Rejewski's algebraic techniques, yes. The deduced wiring of the rotors they knew. Critically, the designs and concepts behind their automated machines, the cyclometer, and especially the bomba, the entire intellectual infrastructure.
Complete technology transfer, essentially.
Absolutely. The offer, made in early 1939, was total. But there was one condition.
What was the catch?
Not really a catch, more a demand for commitment. Poland needed the British and French to finally finally believed them. They wanted a formal, permanent, intelligence-sharing partnership established immediately. They needed their allies to actually commit.
And this time, facing the imminent threat of Hitler, the British finally listened.
They finally acted. But the timing is just heartbreakingly close to the wire. This leads to the famous meeting in Paris, near Warsaw, in the summer of 1939, July 1939, just weeks before the invasion of Poland.
So high-level British and French intelligence officials finally go to Warsaw, ready to listen seriously.
Yes. People like Alistair Denniston, the head of GC&CS, and Dilly Knox, one of their top cryptanalysts, along with French counterparts. The atmosphere must have been incredibly tense, driven by the sheer terror of Hitler's obvious preparations for war.
And the Poles, they laid it all out.
They gave the presentation of a lifetime. They didn't just talk, they demonstrated. They showed the British and French their operational replica Enigma machines. They walked them step by step through Rejewski's permutation analysis. They explained the bomba concept.
What was the reaction from the British side? People like Knox, who had struggled with Enigma themselves.
Our sources say they were absolutely stunned, shocked. There was this immediate dawning realization of the scale of what the Poles had achieved, and crucially, how much time Britain and France had wasted dismissing it.
They realized their own arrogance had blinded them for years.
Completely. Knox, in particular, reportedly grasped the implications almost instantly. They saw that the very mathematical complexity they thought made Enigma unbreakable was exactly what the Poles had cleverly exploited using group theory. Their own assumptions had been the barrier.
So they immediately recognized the immense value of what they were being given.
Oh, absolutely. But they also understood the terrible urgency. They knew the Polish method based on the repeated key was already obsolete or becoming obsolete due to the German upgrades.
Right, the gift had an expiration date.
A very short one. But what they also recognized was the immense value of the foundational work. The deduced rotor wirings, the mathematical approach itself, and critically, the concept of using automated electromechanical machines like the bomba to test keys systematically. That was the key to the future.
They knew they had to build on that foundation, adapt it for the new German procedures.
Immediately. They needed to take this Polish blueprint and industrialize it, scale it up, adapt it.
And that right there is the seed for Bletchley Park's success.
That is the direct handover moment. The British teams, particularly Alan Turing and Gordon Welshman, who would soon arrive at Bletchley Park, were essentially handed the intellectual starting blocks. They got the crucial rotor wiring information, the mathematical insights, and the conceptual design for an automated code-breaking machine.
So Turing's famous bomb machine
Was a direct evolution and adaptation of the Polish bomba concept, redesigned to tackle the increased complexity of the five-rotor Enigma and the lack of the repeated key. It was built upon that Polish foundation. Bletchley Park literally stood on the shoulders of Polish brilliance, as our sources emphasize.
But for the Polish codebreakers themselves, this moment of vindication was immediately followed by tragedy.
Horrifically so. That crucial meeting was late July 1939. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. The country was overrun in weeks.
What happened to the Cipher Bureau in Warsaw?
It had to be evacuated and destroyed to prevent capture. The core team Rejewski, Różycki, Zygalski became refugees. They had to flee their homeland, escaping through Romania.
Did they make it to the Allies?
Eventually, yes, most of them. They continued their work secretly in France for a while, at Post-PC Bruno, near Paris, processing Enigma traffic alongside French and eventually British colleagues. But when France fell in 1940, they had to flee again, scattering across Vichy France, North Africa, some eventually making it to Britain. Różycki tragically died in 1942 when his ship sank in the Mediterranean.
So they were scattered, exiled, while their work became the foundation for Allied victory.
Exactly. Bletchley Park took that foundation and built an immense code-breaking operation. They were able to rapidly achieve consistent decryption of Enigma, providing the vital intelligence codenamed Ultra.
Intelligence that was crucial in the Battle of Britain, the U-boat war in the Atlantic.
Absolutely critical moments. The consensus among historians is that Ultra, originating from that Polish breakthrough, shortened the war significantly. Estimates range from 2 to 4 years and saved countless, likely millions of lives. All built on that initial Polish gift, delivered just in the nick of time.
It's an incredible impact. Which makes the next part of the story, the way the Polish contribution was treated after the war, even harder to stomach.
It really is. It's a profound case of historical injustice, or at least historical neglect, for a very long time.
For decades, the story was basically the British cracked Enigma at Bletchley Park, right?
Largely, yes.
Yeah.
When the story of Bletchley Park finally started to emerge from under the blanket of official secrecy, mainly in the 1970s thanks to books like F.W. Winterbotham's The Ultra Secret, the narrative was very much focused on the British achievement. Turing, Welchman, the code-breaking huts, the British bombs. The absolutely crucial foundational work done by the Poles was often minimized, relegated to a brief mention or a footnote, or sometimes just completely ignored.
Was that purely down to secrecy?
Yeah.
Or was it more deliberate?
Secrecy played a huge role, obviously. For decades, no one could talk about any of it. But even after the secret started coming out, there seems to have been an institutional reluctance, certainly in Britain, to fully share the credit. The narrative of British genius was already established. It was powerful, part of the national story of winning the war.
And inserting these Polish mathematicians, who are then behind the Iron Curtain for much of the Cold War.
Exactly. It complicated the simple narrative. Plus, Poland was under Soviet influence, which made acknowledging their vital contribution politically awkward for some in the West during the Cold War. It really wasn't until more serious historical research emerged, and Polish voices themselves could be heard more freely in the West from the late 70s and 80s onwards, that the record started to be corrected.
What happened to Marian Rejewski, the man who made that first incredible breakthrough? Did he ever get the recognition he deserved?
He lived until 1980. After the war, having served with the Polish forces in exile in Britain, he actually returned to Poland in 1946.
To communist Poland.
Yes. Which meant he couldn't speak about his cryptographic work at all. He was investigated by the secret police, viewed with suspicion because he'd been in the West. He ended up working quietly as an accountant in various state-run enterprises.
An accountant, the man who broke Enigma.
Incredible, isn't it? He lived a very modest, anonymous life for decades. It was only towards the very end of his life, as the ultra secret started breaking and Polish historians began documenting the story, that he started to receive some recognition. He published his memoirs on the Enigma work shortly before he died.
So he saw the beginning of the truth coming out, but for most of his life.
For most of his life, one of the greatest intellectual heroes of the 20th century lived in obscurity, his contribution largely unknown to the world he helped save. It's a deeply tragic postscript.
Let's try and pull together the threads here then. Synthesize those reasons for the initial dismissal, because that's the real core lesson, isn't it? Why do smart people in powerful institutions miss the obvious?
I think it boils down to a few key things we've touched on. First, that too good to be true problem. The Polish solution was so elegant, so counterintuitive, based on the prevailing wisdom, Enigma is unbreakable. Sometimes the human brain, especially an institutional brain, rejects things that seem too neat, too simple, or too challenging to its core beliefs.
They trust complexity over elegance.
Or they trust their own models of complexity above all else. Second, as we discussed, the immense psychological barrier of admitting failure. The longer the British and French dismissed the Polish claims, the more their own pride and credibility were invested in those claims being false. To finally say you were right all along meant admitting years of dangerous arrogance and failure. That's hard for anyone, let alone major state institutions.
Especially with war looming.
Precisely. And that ties into the institutional blindness. Powerful organizations tend to assume that if they can't solve a problem, maybe nobody can, or at least nobody lesser than them can. They create an intellectual echo chamber.
They couldn't conceive that brilliance might exist outside their own established centers of power and intellect.
Exactly. They had filters in place. They were equipped to listen to intelligence from generals, from well-placed spies, from people within their own established hierarchies. They simply weren't equipped, culturally or intellectually perhaps, to accept paradigm-shifting genius delivered by a small team of young mathematicians from a nation they looked down on. The source didn't fit, so the message was rejected. #outro.
So when we wrap up this deep dive, what's the lasting takeaway? It's not really about the math, is it? As amazing as that is.
No, the math is incredible. But the enduring lesson is about human factors. It's about power, it's about prejudice, and it's about that dangerous tendency we all have, perhaps especially within institutions, to dismiss brilliance when it comes from unexpected places, from sources we're conditioned to overlook or underestimate.
The irony is just, it's crushing, really. The very people who were convinced Enigma was unsolvable refused to believe that someone else had solved it.
And in that refusal, rooted in their own intellectual national pride, they came dangerously close to costing the Allies the single most important intelligence advantage of the entire Second World War, an advantage gifted to them that they initially threw back.
The work of Rejewski, Różycki, and Zygalski, the bedrock of Bletchley Park's success, was almost lost, almost erased, because the powerful institutions that needed it most couldn't see past their own assumptions and biases.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it? That huge, world-changing breakthroughs often don't come from the center. They come from the margins, from people and places that the establishment might be ignoring.
Which leaves us with a question, maybe a challenge for you listening today. What crucial insights, what vital truths might we be collectively dismissing right now?
Yeah, simply because the source isn't who we expect, or because the information challenges the comfortable assumptions of our own powerful established institutions.
Maybe that's the most important code we all need to work on cracking.